In a gloomy, rainy day, a family is saying farewell to an elderly woman. An old man breaks down in grief in front of the body. The woman was the grandmother of a young man named Kentaro. Kentaro repeatedly fails the national bar examination and is known to be rather lazy. Later, Kentaro learns from his mother Kyoko and his older sister Keiko that his grandfather, Kenichiro, who cried so hard that day, is not his biological grandfather. The next day, Keiko calls Kentaro and asks him to join her in a quest to find out more about their real grandfather. However, Kentaro, being the lazy person he is, does not want to go. After a little persuasion, Kentaro agrees to go only after hearing that Keiko will pay him. Later, they visit Kenichiro's place and ask him if he is okay with them investigating their real grandfather. Kenichiro likes the idea and tells them the name of the person they are looking for, Miyabi. They also learn that Miyabi joined the Navy Air Service and died in the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. Although he was 26 when he died, he had their mother Kyoko after marrying their grandmother, Matsuno, in his early 20s. Later, they go to old comrades of Miyabi's that Keiko found after writing to them. The first man they visit tells them that Miyabi was the most cowardly man the Navy had ever seen. He also tells them that Miyabi loved his life more than anything, and, while every pilot fought to win, all Miyabi cared about was staying alive. The comrade shows them his severed hand and tells them that Miyabi made it back without a scratch that day, which is impossible amidst all the gunfire. The man believes Miyabi hid during those missions and returned when they were over. At night, Kentaro asks his mother about Miyabi, but she does not know anything because her mother never told her. His mother suspects that it is because their marriage was a failure. The next day, they ask many old comrades who claim they knew Miyabi, but all their answers are the same. Miyabi was a very cowardly person who was a disgrace to the Navy. However, one man, who possesses a beautiful sword in his home, refuses to talk about Miyabi and asks them to leave, only hinting that if Miyabi was a coward, why would he join the Special Attack Unit, which is famously known as KAMIKAZE, military aviator. Subsequently, they visit another man named Izaki in a hospital, who tells them a different story. He claims that Miyabi was the best of the best, and that the other guys envied him because of his excellent fighting skills. He explains that Miyabi would swerve away right at the start of the battle in the air and escape to the high skies to maintain a lookout. Miyabi flew a Zero fighter jet, which was ahead of its time. Miyabi detested the war, and this aversion led to the malicious rumors of him being a coward. Izaki begins recounting Miyabi's story in a flashback, where Miyabi and his fellow pilots became the leading air force at the time and steered the war in the Pacific. After the successful attack on Pearl Harbor, Miyabi feels saddened, unlike the rest of the crew. Izaki takes a moment to converse with Miyabi, who expresses his belief that they failed their mission because there were no carrier ships in the vicinity when they attacked. Miyabi also reflects on the numerous pilots who died and articulates his renowned line, "I do not wish to die." A year later, Miyabi's prediction comes true, and they face a significant battle at Midway, where the failure to destroy the carriers exacts a heavy toll. They lose their carrier and are forced to make an emergency landing at sea. Another year passes, and they are stationed in Rabaul, where Japan's finest pilots are assembled. Soon after, Miyabi gets promoted to platoon sergeant. Serving alongside him are Izaki and a man named Koyama. However, Koyama disapproves of Miyabi's leadership, which prioritizes survival over engaging the enemy. One night, Miyabi shares with Izaki a photo of his wife and daughter, revealing that his desire to live and return home is for their sake. Yet, voicing a desire to return was deemed impossible for pilots at that time, as they were expected to sacrifice their lives for their country. A few months later, the Navy assigns them a mission that Miyabi deems a suicide mission after analyzing the outcomes. One of the pilots confronts Miyabi, accusing him of demoralizing the troops. Following a challenging battle, Miyabi, Izaki, and Koyama managed to return to their base, with Miyabi having refused to conduct a suicide bombing. However, Koyama was forced to halt his return due to depleted fuel. When the search party set out to find him, they are unsuccessful, as sharks in the area might have consumed him. Izaki asserts that during countless brushes with death, he always found solace and strength in Miyabi's words. Izaki contends that by opting to persevere and live through such times, Miyabi was not a coward, but rather the bravest individual he knew. Keiko inquires whether Miyabi ever reunited with his daughter or Matsuno after she was born. Izaki recounts that Miyabi once visited them and promised to return, even if he died. Izaki also shares that his doctor had given him merely 3 months to live over 6 months ago, yet he now understands his prolonged survival. It is to share Miyabi's story. Leaving the hospital feeling enlightened and motivated to uncover more about Miyabi, Keiko informs her mother about her father, invoking feelings of joy and pride. In the following days, Kentaro delves deeper into Miyabe's past and discovers a man named Takeda, who presently runs a prosperous business. Kentaro arranges a meeting with Takeda by mentioning Miyabi, and they begin to converse. Takeda remembers Miyabi, his flight school instructor, and their intense training as high school students, unaware of their future in the Special Attack Force. He tells Kentaro that many casualties in the force were just high school students like them. In a flashback, Takeda recalls how Miyabi prioritized their lives over military goals by consistently denying their progression to combat, regardless of their practice performance. During an examination, a student dies due to equipment malfunction. The general labels the deceased student a disgrace for dying before facing the enemy. Miyabi passionately defends the student but faces scolding and punishment from the general. The general accuses Miyabi of cowardice for not advancing his students, criticizing his reluctance. Subsequently, Takeda and his team qualify and join the battle alongside Miyabi. In one harrowing encounter, a young student heroically saves Miyabi's life by ramming his plane into the enemies, resulting in his own severe injury. Following this event, Takeda and the other students are relocated to a different base, and later, Takeda receives news of Miyabi's death. However, Kentaro remains puzzled about why Miyabi would enlist in the Special Attack Force given his strong will to live. Upon parting, Takeda encourages Kentaro to pursue a successful career and cherish his life, honoring Miyabi's legacy. Continuing his investigation, Kentaro spends time with friends who equate the Special Attack Force with suicide terrorists, infuriating Kentaro with their lack of understanding, prompting him to distance himself from them. That night, he seeks out the man, Kagura, who initially refused to discuss Miyabi, challenging the notion that Miyabi would join the Special Attack Force if he were a coward. Kagura, who harbored resentment towards Miyabi for always returning unscathed, frequently challenged him to combat simulations. Despite Kagura's provocations, Miyabi consistently outmaneuvered him. In one instance, Kagura, frustrated by his inability to best Miyabi, resorts to shooting him during a simulation, a clear violation of regulations. Miyabi, however, chooses not to retaliate, further infuriating Kagura. Before their conflict could escalate further, the war intensifies, leading the Japanese to conceive the desperate strategy of the Special Attack Plan, a scheme reliant on the pilot's sacrifice. A few months later, Kagura is assigned the duty of escorting the Special Attack Forces to the front, where he encounters Miyabi again, but this Miyabi is unrecognizable from the man he once knew. By this time, Miyabi has become despondent, grieving for his students who have died in the suicide missions. Furthermore, the enemy's aircraft have vastly outclassed the Zero fighter, deepening Miyabi's despair as he witnesses the sacrifice of his pupils. Amid this turmoil, Miyabi, for reasons unknown to Kagura, volunteers for the Special Attack Force. Despite Kagura's attempts to dissuade him, the critical circumstances and the volunteering of other senior pilots render his efforts futile. Kagura then vows to defend Miyabi's aircraft at all costs. However, their mission is abruptly compromised when an enemy assault disables Kagura's plane engine, preventing him from keeping pace with Miyabi, whose plane vanishes, leaving Kagura distraught and in tears. Kagura later reveals to Kentaro that something unusual occurred that day. Miyabi had exchanged his aircraft with another pilot, opting for an older model. Moreover, the plane Miyabi relinquished suffered an engine malfunction, necessitating an emergency landing that inadvertently spared that pilot's life. Learning this, Kentaro gets engulfed by anger, realizing his grandfather could have been saved. Kagura provides Kentaro with a roster of those who served in the Special Attack Force, aiding him in uncovering who survived in place of his grandfather. After bidding Kagura goodbye, Kentaro departs. Subsequently, Kentaro and Keiko discover that the individual who lived because of the switched planes was none other than Kenichiro, the man they had always known as their grandfather. The next morning, Kenichiro convenes a meeting with Kentaro, Keiko, and their mother to unveil the narrative Matsuno had implored him to withhold. He divulges that he was the youthful pilot who had once shielded Miyabi from enemy fire. Through a flashback, it is shown that following this episode, Miyabi had visited Kenichiro to present him with a uniform tailored by Matsuno, also sharing a photograph of Kyoko and Matsuno with him. After this interaction, Kenichiro lost touch with Miyabi until their paths crossed again in the Special Attack Force, by which time Miyabi had profoundly changed. After discovering that both Miyabi and Kenichiro are listed in the Special Attack Force, they find themselves beside a river, engaging in a reflective conversation about life. The following morning, as they are poised for departure, Miyabi requests to exchange aircraft with Kenichiro, desiring to pilot the first plane he ever flew for what might be his final flight. Kenichiro consents, and they swap planes before taking off. However, Shortly after, the plane Kenichiro is in encounters a malfunction, and Miyabi, flying alongside, signals him to return, revealing that Miyabi had orchestrated the switch. Subsequently, Kenichiro embarks on a quest to locate Matsuno, only to discover her residence was destroyed in an air raid. After a 2-year search, he finds Matsuno in another city, struggling to raise Kyoko alone. Witnessing the circumstances of Miyabi's loved ones, Kenichiro is overwhelmed with sorrow. He reveals to Matsuno that his survival was not mere luck. He had found a photograph of her and Kyoko in the cockpit, along with a note instructing the finder to look after them if they were in need. Despite initially refusing him, Matsuno endures alone with Kyoko, while Kenichiro, determined to honor Miyabi's legacy, persistently visits, offering his support. Although Matsuno is initially resistant, Kenichiro's steadfast presence gradually erodes her resolve, and she begins to accept his assistance. Over time, what began as a mission to fulfill a fallen comrade's last wish blossoms into love. During one visit, Kenichiro, overwhelmed by his feelings, confesses his love to Matsuno. Embarrassed, he attempts to depart, but Matsuno stops him, sharing that she perceives Miyabi's spirit and promise in Kenichiro's actions. Acknowledging this connection, she accepts his love, recognizing it as a continuation of Miyabi's legacy, and they finally marry, uniting their lives in the shadow of their shared history and honoring Miyabi's memory. Kenichiro then presents the photograph and note that Miyabi left behind, conveying to them that Miyabi's greatest fear was not death itself, but the uncertainty of what would become of Matsuno and their daughter in his absence. He shares with them that although they never spoke of Miyabi, his memory and legacy were never forgotten within the family. In a reflective moment, Matsuno confides in Kenichiro about a mysterious incident shortly after the war, where a man wielding a sword intervened to rescue her from being dominated by a local gang leader, suggesting that Kagura might have been the savior, thereby settling his own debts. But Kenichiro never spoke about it. Upon discovering the intertwined fates and sacrifices, Kentaro is deeply touched. Tears stream down his face as he envisions Miyabi bravely piloting his aircraft through the dangers of combat. The narrative then shifts to depict Miyabi's final mission with the Special Attack Force, displaying his skill in avoiding enemy fire. Before long, Miyabi's plane is hit and the movie ends as he aims his plane towards the carrier ship and bravely heads down.